Hey everybody, welcome to Landscape Rescue. It has been raining for 5 days straight, so let's go into Lowe's, let's do a shopping video. I have no idea how long this video is gonna last because it's literally raining right now as we speak. So let's get in there. Started to rain again, so I'm gonna have to stick around the covered area. And it just kind of puts you in a difficult spot as the host of a famous nursery shopping video channel on YouTube that, you can't even say that with a straight face. It puts you in a unique position where you want to shoot something, you want to show value, but at some point, it's a little rough, I was walking around over here and we've talked okay, I remember to turn my mic on. That's good. That's good. We've talked several times about hostas being a really good pay it forward plant, right? So that theory, pay it forward, we give plants, we get plants, right? Especially if you have a plant person that's a lot of fun and you can exchange plants, really cool plants. I've experimented with that in my life, and it was mostly with my friends' moms. So we would trade plants. It's kind of odd, you know, sitting there talking to your buddy's mom about plants for 25 minutes while he's trying to go out, you know, and needed you to go with him. Yeah, he's like, come on, bro, we're going to the bar, bro. I'm like, hold on. I'm trying to work your mom for some of these irises she has over in the corner. So anyway, Hosta's great plant, pay it forward plant. So they've got these smaller hostas in these little 1 quart for $5.48, so $5.50 for these. Now this is First Frost hosta, and let me see if I can get a size on it. It's not an intimidating, yeah. So 16 inches tall, 18 inches wide. So if you're doing a big hosta bed, this might be kind of second tier, maybe. Yeah, second tier. Just depends on what you wanted to play forward, what kind of perennials you wanted to use. But with shade stuff, sometimes it's a little difficult to do. I'm not a huge fan of shade, but I like the challenge that shade offers. I'm a big fan of hostas, as you guys could probably tell. One of my very favorites, and I wanted to show you this one here, is the drinking gourd. So the drinking gourd. And this one is also $5.50. And 16 to 24. I feel like these get a little taller than First Frost, but it could just be because the leaves don't lay over. They stay upright and look, not necessarily stay, but they're very upright in their growth habit. So maybe that's why I feel like they get taller than First Frost, but First Frost is a really good one. Francis Williams is an oldie but a goodie. This is Francis Williams. Francis Williams is, oh, what an idiot. So this one right here is a Francis Williams. This is a Liberty. So we'll talk about the Francis Williams first, just for editing purposes. I don't want to confuse my very slow-moving brain. So 18 to 24, getting a little bit bigger. Look how pretty that is. This is a Francis Williams. This one's been around as long as I've been around doing, whenever I was like plant aware, you know. Now this is the Liberty hosta like we were talking about, and a little deeper margins, right? So those margins are more pronounced. And if we're looking at it versus the Francis Williams, a lighter green, more like a Patriot, but instead of a white variegation, we have a yellow variegation. So we've talked about this before, about how hostas, a lot of times you can just hodgepodge hostas in as long as you're cognizant of height. You can go in there with a ton of different varieties of hostas because they share so many similarities that you won't have an epileptic fit. This is very similar to a Patriot hosta, except the Patriot hosta's variegation is a little bit more on the white side, where this is a little bit more on the yellow. There's small nuances that make them different. You can put those right next to each other and it's still going to be soothing, right? What I caution people against is doing something crazy to where now your beds aren't soothing anymore, they're stimulating. It's my opinion that a garden is soothing, right? It's a soothing space. It's not a stimulating space. So I'm not a huge fan of like that Edward Scissorhand style, Disneyland style landscaping, which Disney World, Disneyland has amazing landscaping, but there's a lot of whimsy to it. I think little pockets of whimsy is appropriate, but you want it to be soothing. Not that this is a scenario that would ever really happen, but I just kind of picture, you know, like having a dinner party and having this crazy landscaping, you know, with like strobe lights and stuff, and Aunt Suzanne taking her top off and kicking over the picnic table that's got the oil lamps on it and setting your fence on fire. I mean, all because your landscaping wasn't soothing. Soothing, soft light, right? Soft light. Very complementary colors, not necessarily without contrast, but, you know, just nothing too crazy. Soothing. Okay, so that's why the Liberty Hosta looks a lot like, and they're all kind of sports with each other. I think, is it the Fire and Ice Hosta is a sport of the Patriot, and when I look at those, I really can't tell too much difference between them. Well, Fire and Ice was patented at the time, and Patriot wasn't, and so I just bought Patriots because they were like $3 cheaper, right? Especially knowing your audience. My audience at the time was, you know, homeowners that were hiring me to do the landscaping for them, or hiring my company to do the landscaping for them, and so it wasn't a big deal that we planted Patriots instead of Fire and Ice. If I could save the customer some money, they weren't going to know the difference. Okay, that's the rub. Here's a Patriot right here. So this is a Patriot hosta, and see how I have the more white variegation to it? It's a little, like especially that leaf there, very white, versus that Liberty hosta, similar, but not the same. A small nuance, a small little turn of the color wheel is okay, unless we're specifically going after a big contrast. You know, those big turns of the color wheel, remember, I'm usually only using 2 or 3 colors in there. Purples, whites, well, 4. I mean, if you count white, but you know, we're doing whites, we're doing purples, we're doing yellows, we're doing pinks, right? All complementary, except for that purple, right? That purple is your outlier color. So I would consider that still soothing. I would consider that soothing. So let me show you kind of what I would do in a flower bed. Because it's raining cats and dogs right now, so we're gonna have to do something. I mean, hostas are only gonna get us so far, right? Now we do have some ferns over here. If you guys wanna talk about ostrich ferns and you wanna talk about Japanese painted ferns and ghost ferns and things like that, a lot of times I just use a stilby. I have to be honest with you. Ferns are they're so temperamental in our area that a lot of times the summers just get real hot, and even if you have them in full shade, they don't really do well. Now put them in a forest environment in dense shade, you'll see pockets of ferns. But those pockets are in areas that is the perfect environment for them, and then you deviate 50 feet, there's no more ferns. Does that make sense? Because it's not that microclimate that they like. I think they're a little bit more on the finicky side. I don't think they're super tough, but it's one of the oldest land plants. I think the fern was the first vascular land plant. Despite however old you think the earth is, you know, ferns have been around a long time. And they're kind of like that old grumpy guy that is always yelling at the birds about eating his grass seed in his front lawn. They're set in their ways. They're set in their ways, and they're not going to like change very much. That's the way I look at ferns. They've been around a long time. They know a lot of stuff. That's a very wise plant with a very old soul, and it's not going to listen to you. Right? It knows better than you. All right, so let's do this. Let me go grab my whiteboard. I went and bought one of those a while back to shoot a video with, and it never ended up making the cut. And I want to kind of go through some general design, just very easy design stuff for any new folks to the channel. Welcome. And we'll do that, and that will be a decent little video I've wanted to do for a while. So we've got ferns, we have some hostas, so maybe we talk about a dappled shade kind of situation. A lot of us are doing that underneath a tree. Okay, so that will be a fictional scenario where we're underneath a big oak tree, a big 200-year-old oak, where we have plenty of time to work on, or we have plenty of space to work with, but we still have some challenges that those big trees present. Let's do it. All right. This might work. We might be able to make this work. All right, so I stole some supplies from my little boy's school supplies. He's out of school now, so it's not like we're gonna do anything. Okay, so blank whiteboard. Let's do this. Let's say, here's our tree, right? And it's gonna be a little bit more imposing. We have a tree. Not an artist, by the way. All right, I'm going into this knowing I'm not an artist. What's happening, man? Hey, you can come through here. You're not gonna disturb me or anything.
Okay.
We're doing anatomy, birds and the bees. Nothing controversial that's gonna give Lowe's a bad name.
Gotcha.
We've got our big tree here in the center, and I like to start, and it depends on what the customer is gonna let me get away with, okay? Because I want a 16-foot bed, right? And a lot of times we would look at this and we would say, okay, if I'm at 12 feet, I have just dappled shade, right? But if I'm at 16 feet, those extra 4 feet running around the tree are gonna give me a lot more sun. And so now I'm jumping into sun territory. And that is kind of a fun place to exist. Or that's what I think. I think that's a fun place to exist, where I have full sun and dappled shade all in the same bed. I have a lot of fun with that. So let's just say here, not gonna be a complete circle, but let's just say, oh God, it's horrible. Let's just say we have 12 feet here. 12 feet here. From the tree to the edge of the flower bed, we have 12 feet. So now I know if we break it down, you might think, like we get in this trap where we're like, oh, well, I can put 4 or I can put 3 4x4 plants in there. But you got to think that if I'm right here, if I think so let's just say I'm shooting for 3 tiers, because a lot of times 3 tiers are doable and it still adds depth, right? I still get to develop some character for this particular bed. So let's just say I'm here, right? So this is gonna be my 3rd tier, 1, 2, 3. Maybe I can get away with getting a foot away from this tree, but I also gotta remember this tree is gonna be pulling a lot of water out. Now the feeder roots are gonna be out here. Wherever the drip line of the tree is, the feeder roots could be out here. But I'm still going to be competing with very big roots and that root flare from this oak tree, this fictional oak tree. So I might want to bring some soil in if I'm going to do that. Now it's obviously going to raise the cost in parts and labor, because now I got to pay for the soil. I don't know, 12-foot bed like this, I might bring in 3 yards of topsoil just to give me something to play with. Now, there are some tricks that you can do here, especially if I'm dealing with big roots. I can get some, let's just say, European hydrangeas. I'm going to use those as a backdrop because even in a very shady situation, they will still grow very well. They just might not flower, right? So I can use those as a backdrop up against this tree just to soften that tree. We're never going to forget the tree's there, but we're going to soften it up a little bit. So then I'm going to do, let's just say 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do 3 European hydrangeas there, right? Just to kind of soften it up on 4-foot centers. So 4-foot centers, I might not put one on the back. And this is obviously for obvious reasons. If the view, right, if we're viewing, I would put this as a little symbol. We're viewing this from this direction, right? I'm viewing the bed from this direction. Here's where the house is. I do not need a plant back here. Maybe these areas right here are, I can fill this up with filler, cheap stuff like hostas. I know Home Depot right now has a 4 for $12 sale going on. 3 for $12. Hostas are cheap usually anyway. And I can turn this into a pay it forward area. Not necessarily super efficient pay it forward situation because these roots are going to grow inside the root mass of this oak, and they're going to be difficult to transplant, but better than, say, leaving it just mulch. Now, 9 times out of 10, we run into a situation like this because the tree is not providing enough sunlight to keep turf going, and it becomes muddy, and people's dogs run around in the mud, and then they spend just as much time on their day off mopping floors and cleaning dirty dog paws. So what they want us to do is they want to come in and they want at least mulch or gravel or something. And I'm going to try to turn them to mulch, and I'm going to try to make this very perennial rich because perennials can be buried by mulch for the most part, just cleaned up a little bit. You guys can come through here. It's no big deal. I won't put you on YouTube. Don't worry about it. Not your faces anyway. First frost, and then you have Patriots over here, and you've already got Patriots. 1,000. You have 1,000 Patriots? Yeah, most of us do. And Halcyon, that doesn't get too big either.
Got that one. I'm blind as a bat. Here I am doing flowers.
Yeah, you're good. Well, it's good because you don't have to worry. Flowers will speak to you. Like Michael Bublé. They just, they just speak to you. All right. I have no idea what we're talking about. So I'm just going to start. Let me look at my drawing here. Okay, so we have our European hydrangeas here. This is 3rd tier. And then now for this 2nd tier, now here's where I would start with the hostas. Okay, so I'm a fan of creating a color palette here, right, where I'm gonna pick a Big Daddy, or because my European hydrangea is gonna get about 4 feet. So if I can stay in that 36-inch mark as far as height, I'm talking about them big boys. Now, because the closer we get to this tree, the less pay it forward these plants are going to become, right? I'm going to be doing a lot of damage to get 3 or 4 plants out of here because they're going to be pretty tight. Oh, I was going to say, speaking of that, when I'm dealing with roots, maybe these European hydrangeas, this might be one of the situations where I'm going to wash the roots and I'm going to try to untangle those roots and get them to splay out. So that way I'm not going to need as much depth, right? So I might not be able to get the power planter in here this close to the tree, foot and a half away from the tree. Probably power planter's not in my future. But what I can do is I can wash those roots. I can get them snug up, make sure I've got some topsoil in there. Maybe between those root flares, I can put some topsoil. And then I'm just going to use some small, like wooden dowels from, like that you would, most of us have them just laying around in the house. I've got a bunch because Titus and I were into kites for a little while there. More so probably me than Titus. But I'm going to pin those little dowels around that trunk, around the plant base, to just kind of stabilize it, and maybe use some miracle tie until it can stand on its own feet, right? So it's not flopping over, because that's one of the unfortunate side effects whenever you wash the roots. They don't have very much stability. So I got to add a little stability for a couple months until they grow out. And then I can just clip that miracle tie, and I can leave those wooden dowels, just kind of small wooden dowels, 8-10 inches worth, right? Just enough to stick in the ground to where they're firm. So I'm doing that there. I'm splaying the roots out, and then I'm just kind of adding some soil so I can get a little closer to that tree. But I still want to be about a foot and a half away, just so I don't create this weird reaching. I don't want that. But if I can get close enough to the tree to where I get to maximize the amounts of square footage that's in my bed, because those plants are just a backdrop, right? Okay, that is an option. My second tier is most likely going to be hostas planted on, I'm going to say 2.5 foot centers, because I want them touching a little bit, right? So at 2.5 foot centers, I'm planting my hostas that are a little bigger. You do not have to use the same variety. I like to do that just so for some soothing cohesion. A lot of times that looks really good when you have, especially if you're doing a perfect circle, which is very formal. If you wanted to do a wavy line around, you could add a little bit more whimsy, I think, to that, and it would still be appropriate. But right now I just did a big circle. Now I might go all the way around with the Big Daddies or the T-Rex or I'm just shooting for something that's 36 by 36. If you end up finding for your second tier, you found something that was going to get 4 feet wide, right? Or God forbid you used a sub and substance hosta, because it's going to take a while to get there, so it's going to look pretty empty. But once it's there, right? You would plant that on 5.5 foot centers, right? If it's going to get 6 foot, if you're planning on watering enough and feeding enough to get it to where it needs to be. Then our first tier, if we wanted a foot from the edge of the bed, we wanted a foot, leave ourselves a foot so that those leaves could just gracefully soften the front of the bed, usually a foot and a half, but it's going to be to the particular plant that you pick. You could even go around with, a lot of times the closer we get to the end of our bed, the closer we get to the drip line of the tree, the more sun we're going to be getting, right? That's common sense. But if you hadn't thought about that, you've got to be in the space for a little while. So maybe common sense that might have been a little smarmy. I didn't mean it like that. Once you get closer to the drip line, now you're getting more morning sun, and now you're getting more afternoon sun, right, to that area. Less foliage to block it. So let's say we might be able to squeeze a fourth tier out of here, because if this is pretty shady and this is starting to get into partial sun, depending on what part of the days we're getting, we might be getting a lot of really good late afternoon sun. From 5 to 9 o'clock we're getting sun here, but over here we're only getting some sun from till about 12. Then that opens us up for being able to use a partial sun perennial, like I would say maybe a creeping phlox, right? Especially if we had a little retaining wall here that creeping phlox could fall over. Because for the most part, our oak tree is usually going to be a little bit above ground, right? And the reason that happens is because water has been rushing down this hill, right? Whichever way the water goes, usually on the backside is a little lower because that tree is diverting water and it's helping hold soil. So a lot of time I've got the tree and then I've got maybe a 2-foot drop, right? So slowly at 12 feet. So I've got, you know, whatever the math is on that, however many inches of drop I'm getting at the end of the 12 feet, it's usually could be as much as 2 feet. And so then we would put in a little flat rock retaining wall or something like that, right? Now we're getting a lot more soil right up against that retaining wall. And we can put some phlox in there. We can put some more perennials that need more sun. But I wouldn't go as far as to put black-eyed Susans and echinacea in there because they're going to get too tall. But I would try to do creeping phlox, and then so we've got 3 foot. This, our second tier is going to be our 3-foot tier, and then we could even go to 18 inches on the next set of hostas. So now you're talking about Patriots and what was that variety we just talked about that looks, I mean, even the drinking gourd would probably do okay there. But I'd want some more variegation. So I think the Patriots or that Liberty hosta would do real well for this tier here. And then we could play around with some more fun perennials in front. Now, that basic fundamental, I'm going to start at some point. Another hypothetical situation. Do you need to come down here?
I'll go around the other way.
Oh, you're okay, man. It's no big deal. Hypothetical situation, we go on the clearance rack and we find a bunch of hostas that are going to get 24 inches. Now, if I've got enough of them on the clearance rack, then I can make the decision that I can throw some flags down. Maybe this is going to be second tier, and I can just plant those as a second tier. I don't have to plant the third tier and the first tier, or the fourth tier and the second tier and the first tier, because I'm planning on four tiers here, right? It doesn't necessarily have to go in not chronological order, but the order in which you're going to install them. You don't have to start with 4 and then work your way to 3, 2, and 1. If you see a really good deal on something on clearance, snatch it up and just figure out where that hosta or where that shade-loving perennial or shade-tolerant perennial is going to work in that space. This is all like design theory, but what else are we going to do? Because we're not walking around Lowe's in the pouring rain. But that's why I bought this thing, so we could have some fun doing some design, and then I never did it. So leave questions in the comments. You guys know I'm very good about answering those, and we'll see what we can do. If you went to 16 feet on this, you could just add another tier. But I do want to caution you about if I was going to buy 3 of a type of hosta, right? So the clearance rack has 3 hostas. They're $4 a piece. It's a really good deal. I'm going to snatch up these 4. They get 18 to 24 inches tall, 18 to 24 inches wide. So I would pick my side, or I'd pick my tier. Okay, that's going to be somewhere around my third tier, my second tier, depending on how many tiers I'm going to have. I would not put those right next to each other. Here's why I say that. So this is, so let's say we're doing a 4-tier system. We got tier 4, here's tier 3. I've got 3 hostas that I found on the clearance rack. I'm not going to put those 3 hostas right next to each other like this on whatever my budget is telling me as far as closeness goes, where I'm going to put those. I'm not going to put those 3 here. This is most likely what I would do. I would spread them out. And the reason I say that is what I don't want to do across the board is put them right next to each other and then not be able to find them again on clearance. And then what ends up happening? I have to buy them full price. And so I got 3 that were a really good deal. Now I'm committed to $12 Shadowland series hostas, and I need more throughout to bring that cohesion in, and I'm spending too much money. So what I would hope that you would do, take my mistakes, especially if I like this hosta. I'd have one central, and then I have one here, and then I have one up here. That way I've got more versatility to work in other clearance, shade tolerant perennials in there and not throw the whole thing off. If you do one here and one here, that's pretty central. And then I think it would just look goofy as you started adding more shade tolerant perennials in there. If you stuck with hostas, it would probably be okay, because those nuances they're compatible with each other. But you start putting in a stilby and all sorts of weird stuff, and they're blooming, not weird stuff, but you know what I'm saying, they're blooming at different times. It would be really nice to have an astilbe blooming here, here, and here, rather than 3 astilbe blooming. All right, because I don't have any more astilbe. Now I have hostas, right? Okay, so I hope that helps. I hope I go back and edit this video and I actually keep it. That's a thing I hope, because I had a lot of fun doing this for you guys, and I'm a lot better at this in person than I am on the internet. So I need to practice more. Thank you very much for coming along with me. This is Landscape Rescue. I'm Stuart Moore, and thank you very much for letting me into your home to talk about plants.